The desert wind howled across the barren landscape of northern Afghanistan, carrying with it the scent of dust and danger. Captain Jake Morrison crouched behind a rocky outcrop, his rifle steady against his shoulder as he surveyed the Taliban compound through his scope. The mission had been classified as routine reconnaissance, but nothing about this place felt routine. "Control, this is Eagle 1, Morrison whispered into his radio. "Visual confirmation on the target building. No movement detected." Static crackled, back through his earpiece. The communication had been spotty all morning, which made Morrison's stomach turn. In hostile territory, reliable comms meant the difference between going home and becoming a casualty statistic. Beside him, Sergeant Tom Bradley adjusted his position, sending a small cascade of pebbles down the hillside. Both men froze, listening for any sign they'd been detected. The compound below remained silent, its mud brick walls baking under the relentless Afghan sun. "You think they're really gone?" Bradley asked, his voice barely audible. Morrison shrugged. Intelligence reports suggested the compound had been abandoned for weeks, but intelligence reports had been wrong before, dead wrong. The kind of wrong that got good soldiers killed and left families back home wondering why their sons and husbands weren't coming through the front door anymore. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. A high-value Taliban commander named Khalil Rahman was believed to have used this compound as a weapons cache and operational headquarters. The brass wanted confirmation that the site was clear before sending in a larger team to collect intelligence and destroy any remaining ordnance. Morrison's team consisted of himself, Bradley, and 2 other soldiers positioned on the opposite ridge. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos and Corporal David Chen were veterans like himself, soldiers who'd learned to trust their instincts over paperwork and promises from officers who'd never felt sand in their boots or bullets whipping past their heads. "Control, Eagle 1 requesting permission to advance." Morrison spoke into his radio again. Nothing but static answered him. He tried again, adjusting the frequency. "Control, do you copy?" More static, punctuated by an electronic whine that made him wince. Bradley was already reaching for his backup radio when Morrison held up a hand. Through the static, something else was coming through. A voice, faint but unmistakable. "Anyone out there? This is Ghost 7, if you can hear this." Morrison and Bradley exchanged glances. Ghost 7 wasn't part of their operation. Hell, Morrison had never heard that call sign before, and he'd been running missions in this sector for 8 months. "Ghost 7, this is Eagle 1. State your position and status." The response came back clearer this time, though still distorted by interference. "Eagle 1, thank God. This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, call sign Ghost 7. My team was ambushed 3 clicks north of your position. I'm the only survivor." Morrison felt his blood run cold. Chen. That was Corporal Chen's last name. David had mentioned having a sister in the military, but Morrison had never thought to ask which branch or where she was stationed. "Ghost 7, confirm your unit and mission," Morrison said, following protocol even as his mind raced. "Special operations conducting surveillance on high-value target Khalil Rahman. My team was compromised 12 hours ago. I've been evading enemy patrols since then." Morrison's throat went dry. If Rahman was still active in the area, if he'd already eliminated 1 special ops team, then Morrison's reconnaissance mission had just become something much more dangerous. "Ghost 7, are you injured? Do you require immediate extraction?" "Negative on extraction. I have critical intelligence on Rahman's location. He's not at your target compound. He's moved to a secondary location and he's planning something big." Bradley was already scanning the horizon with his binoculars, looking for signs of enemy movement. Morrison knew they were both thinking the same thing. If Ghost 7 was right, they could be walking into a trap. "Control, Eagle 1 requesting immediate backup and extraction for friendly operative." Morrison tried his primary radio again. Still nothing but static. The backup radio crackled to life again. "Eagle 1, my comms are limited. Radio took damage during the ambush. I can't reach higher command." Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for months afterward. He could follow orders, proceed with the original mission, and hope for the best. Or he could trust the voice in the radio and potentially save a fellow soldier while uncovering a larger threat. Ghost 7, what's your current position? Grid reference 41S MD 112345 67890. I'm in a cave system about 2 clicks northeast of the main compound. But Eagle 1, you need to know something else. Rahman isn't just planning an attack on coalition forces. He's got chemical weapons. The words hit Morrison like a physical blow. Chemical weapons changed everything. This wasn't just about gathering intelligence or confirming an empty compound anymore. This was about preventing a potential massacre. Ghost 7 confirmed chemical weapons, are you certain? I watched them load canisters into a truck 6 hours ago. My team died trying to get this information out. Rahman is planning to hit the forward operating base at Kandahar. Morrison's mind raced through the implications. Kandahar housed over 3,000 coalition troops. If Rahman had chemical weapons and was planning an attack, the casualties would be catastrophic. But something nagged at him. How had Lieutenant Chen survived when her entire special ops team had been eliminated? How had she managed to maintain radio communication when his own team couldn't reach command? And why hadn't they been briefed about any special operations in their sector? Despite his doubts, Morrison couldn't ignore the possibility that she was telling the truth. The risk of being wrong was too great. Bradley, get Santos and Chen on backup comms. Tell them we're changing mission parameters. You sure about this, sir? Bradley asked, though he was already reaching for his radio. Morrison wasn't sure about anything anymore, but he was certain of one thing. If there was even a chance that thousands of soldiers were about to be hit with chemical weapons, he couldn't just sit on a hillside and watch an empty compound. Ghost 7, we're coming to your position. Stay put and stay hidden. Roger, Eagle 1. And hurry. I don't know how long before they find me. As Morrison and his team prepared to abandon their original mission and head into unknown danger, none of them realized they were about to become part of something much larger and more dangerous than a simple reconnaissance operation. The voice calling itself Ghost 7 was about to lead them into the most harrowing experience of their military careers. The mission they'd been told was dead was about to come very much alive. The rocky terrain made every step treacherous as Morrison's team moved toward Ghost 7's reported position. What should have been a 30-minute hike stretched into nearly an hour as they navigated around potential ambush points and avoided open ground where they might be spotted by enemy scouts. Morrison kept trying his primary radio every few minutes, hoping to re-establish contact with command. Each attempt met with the same result. Static punctuated by electronic interference that seemed to be getting worse rather than better. Staff Sergeant Santos moved like a shadow despite the heavy pack on her back. Her experience as a forward observer had taught her how to read terrain, and she'd already identified 3 potential sniper positions that could overlook their route. Corporal Chen brought up the rear, his medical training making him valuable for more than just patching wounds. He had a talent for spotting signs of recent human activity that others might miss. Hold up, Santos whispered, raising her fist to signal a stop. The team froze, each soldier scanning their assigned sector for threats. Santos had her binoculars trained on a cluster of boulders about 200 meters ahead. Movement, she said quietly. Could be our girl. Could be hostiles. Morrison felt sweat trickling down his back despite the morning chill. The sun was climbing higher, and soon the temperature would become unbearable. But heat was the least of their worries. If they'd stumbled into an enemy patrol, the backup radio crackled to life. Eagle 1, this is Ghost 7. I can see you approaching from the south. There's a Taliban patrol that passed through here about 10 minutes ago. They're still in the area. Morrison's blood chilled. If Ghost 7 could see them, so could the enemy. Ghost 7, how many hostiles in the patrol? I counted 6, but there could be more. They seemed to be searching for something, or someone. Morrison made quick calculations. His team of 4 against 6 Taliban fighters in terrain that favored the defenders wasn't impossible odds, but it wasn't comfortable either, especially if there were additional enemy forces in the area. Ghost 7, can you give us a safe route to your position? Negative. They've got overlapping fields of fire covering the main approaches, but there's a dried riverbed about 50 meters to your west. It'll provide concealment most of the way. Bradley was already studying the terrain through his scope. I see it, sir. Looks doable, but we'll be exposed for about 30 seconds crossing open ground to reach it. Morrison weighed their options. They could turn back, return to their original mission, and hope Ghost 7 could evade capture long enough for a proper rescue team to be organized. But that assumed they could re-establish communications with command, and it left a fellow soldier in immediate danger. The alternative was to press forward and risk his entire team in what might be a trap. Santos, what's your assessment of those potential sniper positions you identified? 2 of them have clear sight lines to the riverbed. If they've got shooters positioned there, we'll be sitting ducks. Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, trying to think through the tactical situation. Something about the whole scenario felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. Corporal Chen, you mentioned your sister was in the military. What branch? Chen looked surprised by the question. Army, sir, but she's stationed in Germany, logistics company. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Ghost 7 identified herself as Lieutenant Sarah Chen. Any chance your sister got transferred without you knowing? Chen's face went pale. No, sir. We talked last week. She's definitely still in Germany. And her name isn't Sarah. It's Jessica. The implications hit Morrison like a punch to the gut. Either they were dealing with a case of mistaken identity, or Ghost 7 wasn't who she claimed to be. Before he could process this revelation fully, the radio crackled again. Eagle 1, you need to move now. The patrol is circling back toward your position. Morrison found himself facing an impossible choice. Retreat based on his suspicions and potentially abandon a genuine American soldier, or advance toward what might be an elaborate trap. Sir? Bradley was looking at him expectantly, waiting for orders. Morrison made his decision. We proceed, but we assume this could be hostile contact. Combat spread, weapons hot, and if anything feels wrong, we abort immediately. The team acknowledged with subtle nods and hand signals. They'd worked together long enough to communicate without words when necessary. Moving in tactical formation, they made their way toward the dried riverbed. The 30 seconds of exposure felt like 30 minutes as they crossed open ground, expecting at any moment to hear the crack of rifle fire or the whistle of incoming mortars. They reached the riverbed, without incident, but Morrison's unease continued to grow. The silence was too complete. No bird calls, no insects, nothing but the whisper of wind across stone. Ghost 7, we're in the riverbed. Guide us in. Follow the channel northeast for about 300 meters. You'll see a large boulder shaped like a camel's hump. The cave entrance is just behind it. Bradley took point, his rifle ready as he moved through the sandy bottom of the ancient watercourse. Santos followed, her eyes constantly scanning the rim for threats. Chen covered their rear, while Morrison coordinated between his team and the mysterious Ghost 7. As they approached the landmark boulder, Morrison noticed something that made his stomach clench. The sand around the rock formation showed signs of recent disturbance, but not the kind he'd expect from a single person taking shelter. This looked like multiple people had been moving around the area. Ghost 7, we're approaching your position. Show yourself slowly, hands visible. Roger, coming out now. A figure emerged from behind the boulder, and Morrison's suspicions crystallized into certainty. The person approaching them was definitely not an American soldier. The gear was wrong, the posture was wrong, and most tellingly, the weapon they carried was an AK-47, not standard U.S. military issue. Contact front, Morrison shouted, dropping to one knee and bringing his rifle to bear. The figure behind the boulder immediately dove for cover as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the riverbed. Morrison's team found themselves caught in a carefully planned ambush with enemy fighters positioned on both sides of the channel, and at least 2 more at the far end. Bullets whined off rocks and threw up geysers of sand as Morrison and his men sought whatever cover they could find. In the exposed riverbed, the sound of gunfire echoed off the surrounding hills, making it difficult to determine exactly how many attackers they faced. Santos, can you spot the shooters? Morrison called over the noise of battle. At least 4 positions, maybe more. They've got us pinned down good. Bradley had found a slight depression in the riverbed that provided minimal cover. "Sir, we need to move or we're going to get chewed up here." Morrison realized they'd walked into exactly the kind of trap he'd feared. Someone had used sophisticated, psychological operations to lure them away from their original mission and into a kill zone. The voice calling itself Ghost 7 had been bait, and they'd taken it. But understanding the trap and escaping it were two different things. With enemy fighters holding the high ground and his team caught in the open, Morrison needed to find a way out before they all joined the ranks of soldiers who'd never made it home. The radio crackled one more time, but now the voice sounded different. Clearer, and definitely not American. "You walked right into it, Eagle One. Welcome to Afghanistan." Bullets continued to rain down into the riverbed as Morrison pressed himself against the sandy wall, his mind racing through their limited options. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly, with overlapping fields of fire that made any movement potentially fatal. "Bradley, you still with us?" Morrison called out during a brief lull in the shooting. "Roger, sir. Got a through and through in my left shoulder, but I'm still operational." Morrison cursed under his breath. With Bradley wounded and their position compromised, their situation had gone from bad to desperate. The enemy fighters seemed content to keep them pinned down, which suggested they were either waiting for reinforcements or trying to take prisoners. Santos had managed to work her way to a position where she could observe one of the enemy positions. "I count at least 6 shooters on the north rim, maybe more on the south side. They're using the rock formations for cover. Any chance you can call in an airstrike?" Chen asked, applying pressure to Bradley's wound with a field dressing. Morrison tried his radio again, cycling through multiple frequencies. Still nothing but static and electronic interference. Whatever was jamming their communications was sophisticated and powerful. The fake Ghost 7's voice came through the backup radio again, now openly mocking. "Your friends at headquarters don't know where you are, Eagle One. As far as they're concerned, you're still watching that empty compound." Morrison realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to eliminate his team while keeping their disappearance hidden from coalition forces. By the time anyone realized they were missing, the enemy would have had hours or even days to dispose of the bodies and cover their tracks. "What do you want?" Morrison asked into the radio, hoping to buy time while he formulated a plan. "You walked away from your mission to save an American soldier. Very noble, very predictable. We've been watching coalition forces long enough to understand how you think." The voice paused, and Morrison could hear discussion in the background, multiple people speaking in what sounded like Pashto. "Here's what's going to happen, Captain Morrison. You and your men are going to surrender your weapons and equipment. In exchange, we'll let you live long enough to deliver a message to your commanders." Morrison exchanged glances with his team members. Santos shook her head almost imperceptibly. Bradley, despite his wound, had managed to get his rifle into position to cover one approach to their position. Chen was ready with his medical kit, but his weapon was also within easy reach. They were all thinking the same thing. Surrender meant execution, just with extra steps. "I need some time to think about it," Morrison said into the radio, hoping to stall while he worked out a plan. "You have 5 minutes. Then we start shooting your men one by one until you comply." Morrison knew they had to move before the deadline expired. The riverbed offered some concealment, but no real protection from determined attackers with high ground advantage. Their only hope was to create enough chaos to break out of the kill zone and reach terrain where they could mount a defense. Pew studied the layout of the ambush position. The enemy fighters were concentrated on the rim of the riverbed, but they'd left the channel itself relatively unguarded, except for the positions at either end. If his team could move fast enough and create sufficient distraction, they might be able to reach the boulder formation where the fake Ghost 7 had first appeared. Morrison outlined his plan using hand signals. Santos would provide suppressing fire on the north rim positions. Bradley, despite his wound, would engage targets on the south rim. Chen would carry their extra ammunition and medical supplies while Morrison led the assault on the boulder position. It was desperate and dangerous, but it was better than waiting to be killed or captured. Morrison checked his watch. They'd been pinned down for nearly 20 minutes. His shoulder ached from pressing against the riverbed wall and sweat stung his eyes despite the morning chill. "Everyone ready?" he whispered. His team acknowledged with subtle nods. They'd trained for situations like this, though none of them had expected to use those skills in a dried-up riverbed in the middle of nowhere. "On my mark," Morrison said quietly. He took a deep breath, said a quick prayer for his wife and daughter back home, and prepared to either fight his way out or die, trying. The radio crackled one more time. "Time's up, Captain. What's your decision?" Instead of answering, Morrison gave the signal to attack. Santos opened up with rapid, aimed fire at the north rim positions, her rifle barking repeatedly as she forced the enemy shooters to take cover. Bradley, fighting through the pain of his shoulder wound, engaged targets on the opposite side with deadly accuracy. Morrison sprinted toward the boulder formation, Chen close behind him. Bullets whined past their heads and sparked off rocks as they covered the 100 meters of open ground in what felt like the longest run of Morrison's life. They reached the relative safety of the boulders just as Morrison heard Santos call out, "Reloading!" The brief pause in covering fire allowed the enemy fighters to reposition, and Morrison realized they'd only bought themselves a few moments of respite. The boulder formation provided better cover than the riverbed, but they were still outnumbered and surrounded. "Chen, how's our ammo situation?" 6 magazines between us, plus whatever Santos and Bradley have left." Morrison did quick calculations. Against 6 or more enemy fighters in fortified positions, their ammunition wouldn't last long in a sustained firefight. That's when he noticed something that changed everything. Behind the largest boulder, partially concealed by desert camouflage, was a radio antenna. Not a small field radio like the one that had been broadcasting the fake Ghost 7 transmissions, but a larger communication array that looked sophisticated enough to handle long-range encrypted transmissions. Morrison realized they'd found the source of the communication jamming that had isolated his team from command. More importantly, if he could access that equipment, he might be able to call for help. "Chen, can you work your way around to that antenna array? I need to see if we can get a message out." "On it, sir." As Chen began maneuvering toward the communication equipment, Morrison heard Santos and Bradley adjusting their positions in the riverbed. His team was adapting to the changing tactical situation, but they were running out of time and ammunition. The fake Ghost 7's voice came through the radio again, but now it sounded different, less confident, almost frustrated. "You're only postponing the inevitable, Captain. We have you surrounded and more fighters are on the way." Morrison smiled grimly. If the enemy was trying to convince him that reinforcements were coming, it probably meant they didn't have enough people to finish the job with their current force, which meant his desperate gamble might actually have a chance of working. He keyed the radio one more time. "Ghost 7, whoever you really are, you made one mistake." "What's that?" "You assumed we'd be easy prey, but we're American soldiers and we don't go down without a fight." The response came back in accented English, all pretense of being an American soldier finally abandoned. "Then you'll die fighting. It makes no difference to us." Morrison checked his rifle and prepared for the next phase of what was shaping up to be the longest day of his military career. The mission they'd thought was dead had become a fight for survival, and the outcome would depend on whether his team could overcome impossible odds in hostile territory with no support and dwindling resources. But they were still alive, still fighting, and still had one card left to play. Chen worked his way toward the communication array with the patience of a man who understood that one wrong move could get them all killed. The equipment was more sophisticated than anything Morrison had expected to find in this remote location, suggesting they'd stumbled into something much larger than a simple ambush. "Sir, this isn't just jamming equipment," Chen whispered as he examined the setup. "This is a full communication hub, multiple frequencies, satellite uplink, the works." Morrison felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. The elaborate deception, the sophisticated jamming, the precise timing of the ambush. This wasn't the work of a local Taliban cell. This was a coordinated operation involving significant resources and planning. Gunfire erupted from the riverbed as Santos engaged a fighter who'd tried to flank their position. Her shot was clean and precise, but Morrison knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. Their ammunition was limited, and the enemy seemed willing to wait them out. "Can you get it working?" Morrison asked Chen. Maybe. But I'll need a few minutes to figure out their frequency allocation and encryption protocols. You've got whatever time I can buy you. Morrison keyed his radio again, not to the fake Ghost 7, but on a frequency he hoped might reach any coalition forces in the area. Any station, this is Eagle 1 requesting immediate assistance. Grid reference, 41S MD 112-389-67856. Under heavy fire, casualties, need extraction. Static answered him, but after a moment, he heard something that made his heart race. A faint voice, barely audible through the interference. Eagle 1, this is Reaper 27. Say again your position and status. Morrison's hands shook as he repeated his coordinates and situation. Reaper call signs belong to drone operations. If there was a Predator or Reaper drone in the area, they might have a chance. Eagle 1, Reaper 27 has you on thermal. Confirm you are the 4 heat signatures in the boulder formation. Confirmed, Reaper 27. Enemy positions on north and south rim of dry riverbed, approximately 6 to 8 hostiles. Roger, Eagle 1. We have visual on your position. Be advised, we're currently weapons free, but can provide overwatch until ground support arrives. Morrison felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by reality. Drone support was valuable for reconnaissance, but unless the aircraft was armed and authorized to engage, they were still on their own for the immediate fight. The fake Ghost 7's voice cut through the radio chatter, apparently monitoring their frequency. Your eye in the sky won't help you, Captain. We have surface-to-air missiles positioned throughout this valley. Morrison's stomach dropped. If the enemy had SAMs, any aircraft attempting to provide support would be vulnerable. But something about the claim bothered him. Surface-to-air missiles were expensive, sophisticated weapons. Why would a group with that kind of firepower waste time with an elaborate ambush of a 4-man reconnaissance team? Unless they weren't the real target. Chen, when you get that communication array working, I need you to check for any scheduled flights or operations in this sector. What are you thinking, sir? Morrison was beginning to understand the bigger picture. I think we walked into a trap that wasn't meant for us. I think someone else is supposed to be here today. Before Chen could respond, Santos called out from the riverbed. Movement on the south rim. Looks like they're repositioning for an assault. Morrison realized their time was running out. The enemy had been content to keep them pinned down, but if they were preparing to attack, it meant something had changed. Reaper 27, Eagle 1. Can you confirm any other friendly units scheduled to operate in this sector today? The drone operator's response sent chills down Morrison's spine. Eagle 1, be advised that VIP Transport Falcon 1 is scheduled to transit your area in approximately 30 minutes. High-value passenger aboard. Morrison understood now. The elaborate setup, the sophisticated jamming equipment, the surface-to-air missiles, none of it had been intended for his reconnaissance team. They'd accidentally stumbled into a planned assassination attempt on a VIP transport. The fake Ghost 7 had used their call sign to lure them away from their original mission, not to eliminate them specifically, but to clear them out of an area where they might have interfered with the real operation. Reaper 27, you need to wave off Falcon 1 immediately. This is a SAM trap. Eagle 1, I don't have authority to redirect VIP transport. You need to get this intel to higher command. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Not only did he need to get his team out alive, but he had to prevent what could be a catastrophic attack on coalition leadership. Chen had made progress with the communication array. Sir, I've got access to their system. You're right about the bigger picture. They've got detailed flight plans for multiple aircraft, including one designated high-value target Alpha. That's got to be Falcon 1. Can you send a warning? Working on it now, but their encryption is military grade. This is going to take time. Time they didn't have. Morrison could see enemy fighters moving into assault positions. In a few minutes, they'd be overrun, and the information they'd discovered would die with them. That's when Bradley made a decision that would define the rest of the mission. Despite his shoulder wound, he stood up from his position in the riverbed and began advancing toward the south rim, laying down suppressing fire as he moved. Bradley, get back to cover, Morrison shouted. Negative, sir. Someone needs to buy Chen time to get that message out. Santos immediately understood Bradley's plan and began providing covering fire, her rifle cracking repeatedly as she forced the enemy shooters to keep their heads down. Morrison watched his wounded soldier advance across open ground under heavy fire, drawing enemy attention away from Chen and the communication equipment. It was an act of incredible courage that epitomized everything Morrison had learned to respect about the soldiers under his command. Bradley made it halfway to the south, rim before a burst of automatic weapons fire caught him in the chest. He went down hard, but even as he fell, he continued shooting until his magazine ran dry. "Bradley's down," Santos called out. Morrison wanted to go to his fallen soldier, but he knew that abandoning the communication equipment now would make Bradley's sacrifice meaningless. Chen was still working frantically to break through the encryption and send a warning about the SAM trap. The enemy fighters, emboldened by eliminating one of the Americans, began their final assault on the boulder formation. Morrison and Santos found themselves fighting for their lives while Chen worked desperately to prevent a much larger catastrophe. "Got it!" Chen suddenly shouted. "Message is going out on multiple frequencies. Falcon 1 should get the warning." Morrison felt a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. Even if they didn't survive the next few minutes, they'd completed their most important mission. The VIP transport would be warned, the SAM trap would be avoided, and other American lives would be saved. But the immediate fight was far from over. Enemy fighters were closing in on their position, and Morrison could hear more vehicles approaching from the distance. Whether those were reinforcements for the Taliban or rescue for his team remained to be seen. What Morrison knew for certain was that Sergeant Tom Bradley had given his life to ensure that a warning got through, and that Ghost 7, whoever she really was, had led them into something much bigger and more dangerous than any of them had imagined. The sound of approaching helicopters cut through the gunfire like thunder rolling across the desert. Morrison couldn't tell if they were friendly or hostile, but the enemy fighters seemed to recognize the sound because their rate of fire increased dramatically. "Chen, status on that equipment?" Morrison called out as bullets sparked off the rocks around them. "I've been monitoring their communications. They're panicking about something called Operation Sandstorm. Sounds like we interrupted a much bigger plan." Morrison felt a chill despite the rising temperature. Operation Sandstorm sounded like the kind of coordinated attack that could inflict massive casualties on coalition forces. If his team had stumbled into just one piece of a larger operation, the implications were staggering. Santos had taken a position behind the largest boulder, methodically engaging targets as they presented themselves. Her marksmanship training was evident in every shot. No wasted ammunition, no unnecessary risks, just professional competence under extreme pressure. "Sir, I count at least 3 helicopters inbound," she reported. "Can't tell if they're ours or theirs." The fake ghost. Seven's voice crackled through the radio one more time, but now it sounded desperate rather than confident. "You have no idea what you've done, Morrison. You've ruined years of planning." Morrison keyed his radio. Good. That was the general idea. The helicopters were getting closer, and Morrison could see dust clouds on the horizon indicating ground. Vehicles were approaching as well. The tactical situation was about to become much more complex. Chen had moved to Bradley's position to check on their wounded teammate. The news wasn't good. "Sir, Bradley's gone, but he took at least 2 of them, with him before." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, honoring the sacrifice of a good soldier and a better man. Bradley had been married for 6 years with twin daughters he'd never see grow up. The kind of loss that made Morrison question why they were fighting in this godforsaken place at all. But there wasn't time for grief. Not yet. The first helicopter came into view over the ridgeline, and Morrison felt his heart sink. It was a Soviet-era Mi-17, the kind used by Taliban forces throughout the region. Not coalition aircraft coming to rescue them, but enemy reinforcements, arriving to finish the job. "Contact hostile aircraft," Morrison shouted, though there was precious little cover available against an armed helicopter. That's when the second aircraft appeared, and Morrison's assessment of the situation changed completely. The Mi-17 exploded in mid-air as a Hellfire missile struck it amidships, sending flaming debris cascading into the valley below. A U.S. Army Apache gunship swept over the ridgeline, its chain gun already tracking toward the Taliban positions on the rim of the riverbed. The distinctive sound of the 30mm cannon was like music to Morrison's ears as it systematically eliminated the enemy positions that had pinned down his team. Eagle 1, this is Hammer 2-4. We got your message. Sorry we're late to the party. Morrison felt tears of relief streaming down his face. Hammer 2-4, never been happier to see you in my life. The Apache made several passes, ensuring that all enemy positions were neutralized before a Black Hawk helicopter moved in to extract Morrison's team. The professional efficiency of the rescue operation stood in stark contrast to the desperate fighting they'd endured for the past hour. As combat medics attended to Santos's minor wounds and prepared Bradley's body for transport, Morrison found himself thinking about the communication equipment they'd discovered. Chen had managed to download significant intelligence before the shooting intensified. "Sir, you need to see this," Chen said, approaching with a tablet displaying the information he'd extracted from the Taliban communication hub. Operation Sandstorm wasn't just about shooting down one VIP transport. It was a coordinated series of attacks planned across multiple provinces, designed to inflict maximum casualties during a period when coalition forces were scheduled to be in transition between bases. The fake Ghost 7 transmission had been just one piece of an elaborate deception operation. Multiple teams of coalition forces had received similar emergency calls, all designed to draw them away from positions where they might interfere with the planned attacks. Morrison realized that his decision to investigate the distress call, despite his suspicions, had actually prevented a much larger catastrophe.